I'll talk a little bit to Tim, and then I want to open it up because I'm sure a lot of people here have good questions about this too. And I don't know, I wonder how many people here are actually from literary studies? Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think that this book is I mean, it's amazing to read as someone who's been through literary studies, at least as an undergraduate, but also I think relevant beyond it, and hopefully we'll get into some of the ways that it is. But the first thing this book did for me was it did help, as I told him, it helped explain my college experience in English. Similarly, I came to Brown. I guess my undergraduate experience was more like your graduate experience. I came to Brown thinking that you read for beauty and wisdom and these kinds of things, and was taught that was wrong. What you read for politics and ideology, and to learn what was wrong with the cultures that had produced these books. And I remember on the last day of our survey course, we had a survey course everyone had to take for the English department, one of the few requirements at Brown, and we were treated to this speech about how, by the professors, about how people used to read just for pleasure, just to appreciate things, and then we became more sophisticated, and we learned that you had to analyze theoretically, and you had to historicize was the main thing. This was the era of sort of new historicism, and that really the point of literature was to understand the historical period and the culture that had produced these books, and really a political pamphlet was just as literary as Moby Dick, and it was only, don't let anyone tell you otherwise, and this was. And so a student stood up in the back of the room, and I always remember, and she said to the teachers, a lot of us came to this class because we love literature, and you don't love it, And she was like really emotional, and I mean it was almost kind of embarrassing, but it was like also I thought she's right, they don't love it, and Tim's book actually made me sort of think about that student again, and I sort of wanted to think about going back to that college experience, to what extent she was right that they don't love it, or to what extent it's more complicated than that they'd found different kinds of ways to love it that are maybe harder for us to recognize.
Well, the first thing I would say is that I think English professors do love literature. One of the things that I have experienced, and probably other professors have too, is like behind closed doors when there aren't students around, or when it's just other English professors, you will often find yourself partaking in this kind of confessional conversation. Not the one where you talk about the books you haven't read, that's another one. But you'll suddenly say, I effing love Jane Austen, or I effing love Phyllis Wheatley, and I'm not sure why, I just do, right? And it's sort of like, and that really does feel like the confession of a guilty pleasure, that the idea that you have this kind of love, this emotional attachment, because of the way we've mostly been trained, I think we've had to find a way to express that love in largely ideological or political terms. And I think that ideological criticism can accomplish a lot, and it can tell us a lot about the political function of literature and what it does. I don't think it's the best tool for describing the immediate experience of reading and the satisfactions that it offers. It's sort of like trying to hammer a nail in with a shoe or something, right? When you don't have the right tool. But I think that's what we've been forced to do over the past 20, 30, 40 years, is find these kind of oblique ways of registering our affection for literature. And we find a way to do so in political terms. And so that's why I think we're still making aesthetic judgments and engaging in aesthetic appreciation. We're just doing it in this peculiar fashion.
So that's sort of what you mean by talking about aesthetic pleasure going underground for literary critics.
Yeah, and I don't just mean like behind closed doors, like when nobody else is looking. I also mean that you express that love. Like if you look at people's academic work, or if you sit in on an academic class, the love will be there. It'll just be never directly addressed. It'll be, you know what I mean?
So you give a good example with regard to the way people teach Beloved.
Yeah.
In your chapter, Why is Beloved so universally beloved? Maybe you could talk a little about, like, it might be to have an example of the way that sort of the aesthetic pleasure rides in on the other kinds of writing we do about literature and academia.
I mean, Toni Morrison's a tricky case because she's such a stylist, but if you read all the academic criticism, say, of Beloved, which I did, ultimately, the ultimate measure of its work, like the thing that really counts finally for most academics, is the political work. And it does really important political work. I don't doubt that. But then, like one of the essays that really struck me, or there were a couple, was when one of the critics said, "I want to talk about the way in which Beloved participates in this discussion about civil rights and what's happened since civil rights." And then he brings up Beloved, and he says, "I don't have the space here to talk about the baby of Beloved and all that she symbolizes." And it was this weird moment where he sort of had to like put the complex, has all of this sort of ambiguity and meaning, and is sort of what makes the book especially and specifically literary. And it was like he kind of had to repress that part of it. But then in his reading, what he liked about the book, when I started to read it carefully, was that it was engaging in this political debate, but it wasn't taking a side. And so it was like bringing up all these different political positions about race in America, but then kind of subtly subverting each one of them. And so then I realized that what the book was doing was something like politics, but something that literary works have been traditionally expected to do, which is to kind of create an experience in which you try to synthesize competing ideas. So that was like in some ways that was what the new critics thought literature did best, was to like hold in the air contradictory notions. And suddenly I realized that he was appreciating the book for its literary value, but entirely talking about it as if its intervention was primarily political. So, and if I found that the more I read political takes on literature, the more I found these kind of subtle, covert expressions of aesthetic judgment and aesthetic appreciation.